At the White House today, President Biden is preparing to announce expanded federal wildfire response efforts as fires rage across parts of the West. The announcement will come during a meeting with cabinet officials and governors of western states. The measures look to expand the government's response and mitigation capabilities, as well as increase pay for firefighters. Researchers say the 2021 wildfire season has taken off with an alarming start. According to the National Interagency Fire Center, more than 1 million acres have already burned across 12 states. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins me now for more on the White House response about this and other things. So what more are we hearing, Weijia, about the president's announcement coming today?
Well, President Biden is expected to focus a lot about the response to these fires and how the federal government can help bolster not only what's happening right now, but future fires. And so you're right, he is going to announce investments to increase the pay for federal firefighters, which right now is $13 an hour. And he wants to make sure they are getting paid at least $15 an hour. He also wants to talk about new ways to surge the response in terms of personnel by offering more training, by getting more people on board. And then there are more logistics planning that he will also discuss, including new ways to look at these fires, to fight them from above, new aviation capacities, as well as new technology to help crews identify when these might happen beforehand, and something that's user-friendly as well. They are developing new applications to help people try to track these fires better, too, so perhaps they can make plans earlier ahead and get out to safety if they need to. And so this is a very robust discussion that the president is expected to have, and certainly a timely one given those horrific images that we just saw from out west.
Yeah, you just nailed it. I was thinking, boy, if those governors want more money and more attention from the federal government, now is the time to get it. So we were talking earlier with Manuel Bojorquez about the president and the first lady heading down to Surfside, Florida, and, you know, the purpose of their visit, what they're going to be doing. What can you tell us?
Biden wants to make sure that all of the crews there, all the investigators have the federal support that they need, but they don't want to interfere. He just wants to make sure that they're able to do their jobs with everything that they require to try to continue their massive efforts here. And they want to reach out to the families. You know, President Biden in many cases already has been the consoler in chief, and, you know, he usually draws from his personal experiences to really let people know whatever they're going through, especially something as personal and tragic as this, that he is there, he understands, and he wants to make sure that they have what they need as well. And finally, he wants to meet with the first responders and with those people who are working around the clock to, you know, try to uncover as much as they can with regard to what happened here, and of course looking for those who are unaccounted for. So those are his three main objectives. But I think, Anne-Marie, what we can really expect is to see, you know, the human side of the president, as we have seen so many times already in times like this.
Yeah, you know, Weijia, that is one of the things that he's really good at, and his ability comes through experience. Sadly, he knows what it's like to deal with a tremendous amount of loss. So hopefully he can, you know, share his own strategies, his own coping strategies, and certainly his sympathy is genuine. So I noticed that we do not have, well, there's Weijia again. Okay, I wasn't sure if we had lost you for a second, Weijia. I know sometimes those earpieces could be a little troublesome. So before we let you go, I want to ask you about something else. President Biden is planning to announce 8 new federal judicial nominations today. This announcement will mark the 5th wave of judicial nominees. That seems like a lot to me in, you know, it seems like a pretty short period of time. Was it 7 months or so? Yeah. Why is this significant?
Well, this is a huge priority for the administration and for Democrats, both in and outside of government, especially in the wake of what we saw from the former president, Donald Trump, who was able to confirm 230 judges during his tenure and, of course, really reshape the Supreme Court as well. And so because Democrats have this really slim majority right now in the Senate, There is a pressure there to get as many judges as they can confirmed in the case that they lose that majority in less than 2 years. And so that's why we are seeing this push. But, President Biden talked about this commitment on the campaign trail as well. And it's not only about nominating, certain judges. He wants to make history, and he has so far, in nominating a very diverse slate of people. And so several of the people on today's list I was just looking through are, if they are confirmed, could make history. For example, a woman who would be the first federal judge of South Asian descent in Michigan, a labor lawyer who would be the first AAPI judge from Oregon in the Ninth Circuit, an assistant U.S. attorney who would be the second woman of color ever to serve on the federal bench in Virginia. And so we have seen this time and time again from President Biden in the first 4 waves that we have already seen, and so he wants to continue that, and hopefully it will become part of his legacy, because that's something that he's talked about ever since he was a candidate. Anne-Marie. Sorry, I am having a little bit of technical difficulty, but I can hear you.
Okay, good. Trust me, I understand. Weijia, thank you so much.
Sure, thanks.